Hi there. Nikki's just got a few technical issues, I think, so I will temporarily take over. So we're on to the agenda page. So the things that we're going to cover over today are a quick overview of the SPS controls for animal products from the 30th of April. We've got a lot of questions in the last session about the difference between composites and compound products. So we've got some additional slides on that this time. We're going to cover off some common errors with your import notifications and also export health certificates. I'm going to just run through about border control posts and the new SPS inspection messaging service that'll be running from the 30th of April. A little bit about checks and inspections and how to find further information. Nikki,
great.
how are you doing?
That's great. Yes, I'm
back with us. Excellent. All right, I'll hand you back over to Nikki. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So this is the poll. Thank you so much for joining us and helping us with these polls. It's really important information for us to get a sense of where you're at in terms of your preparations. So the first question is, how well does your organisation understand the changes to import controls that will be introduced from the 30th of April 2024? So just choose one of those options and press submit. Been very useful to us since we started this poll, letting us get an insight into how confident you are about the changes and helping us to fill in gaps or to identify gaps in information. Great, so just choose one of those and press submit. That's great. So we're going to have a Q&A. If you look at the top of your screen, there's a Q&A function. Just press that and you can enter a question of your choice, and you can also upvote questions that you'd like to be answered. So one of the main theme of the webinar today is helping you to get it right for the 30th of April SPS controls. And one of the questions we keep getting is about products of animal origin, or POAO, and what the definition of this is. You'll find this in most of our webinars, certainly in December and before then. And these are all uploaded on the AFA website. But just to make clear here, so what we mean by products of animal origin are food of animal origin, including honey and blood, live bivalve mollusks, live echinoderms, live tunicates, and live marine gastropods intended for human consumption. Other animals destined to be prepared with a view to being supplied live to the final consumer. For this session, animal products includes POAO, animal byproducts not for human consumption, and composite products that are not exempt from SPS controls. We also have an overview of import controls for germinal products. So please note, for definitions of animal byproducts and germinal products, please see the earlier webinars. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off with an overview of the 30th of April 2024 changes, and then, as Sarah was saying, we'll go into more depth. Next slide, please. So what changes will you see on April 30th? So starting from the left-hand side. For imports from EU and EFTA countries, except Ireland, all imports of animal products that are subject to SPS controls must enter GB via a port of entry with a border control post designated for that type of commodity. Documentary and risk-based identity and physical checks for medium risk products will begin to take place at BCPs. There will be no routine checks for low-risk animal products, although they will be subject to intelligence-led interventions. For imports from non-EU EFTA so rest of world countries. For imports from non-EU or EFTA countries, rest of world countries, the simplification of imports from non-EU countries will be seen from the 30th of April, including the removal of health certification and routine checks on low-risk animal products. Although, again, these will be subject to import notifications and intelligence-led interventions. There'll be a reduction of physical and identity checks on medium-risk animal products from non-EU risk-assessed countries. So products currently exempt from SPS controls will continue to be exempt from these controls. For example, exempt composite products. Next slide, please. So what action will you need to take for the 30th of April SPS controls? For importers, so the person responsible for the load for EU and EFTA imports to GB, you'll need to check that your chosen port of entry has a border control post, or BCP, designed for the product you are importing. Make sure you are following the correct process for the type of product you are importing, and all this guidance is on gov.uk. Make sure all required documentation is provided, including uploading health certificates and IUU documents to the import notification created and submitted in IPAFs, and on Phyllis where used by the Port Health Authority or port. Make sure all relevant contact details are included in the import notification in case the consignment is called in for checks at the border control posts, particularly the contact details of the person responsible for the load and the transporter. Next slide, please. So, what about the island of Ireland, the SPS controls? Qualifying Northern Ireland goods, or QNIGs, will continue to have unfettered market access, whether they are moved directly from Northern Ireland to GB or indirectly via Ireland. They can enter GB via any point of entry, or POE. From the 30th of April, non-EU goods and goods arriving in England directly from mainland EU must arrive via a point of entry with a suitably designated BCP and will undergo the risk-based controls in the BTOM, in the Border Target Operating Model. From the 30th of April, non-qualifying Northern Ireland goods, non-QNIGs, and other goods arriving in Great Britain from Ireland will undergo risk-based document checks with full controls, but not commencing earlier than the 31st of October 2024. We continue to work with the devolved governments across the UK to agree an implementation date for physical and identity checks on non-QNIGs from Ireland. As soon as we have a firm date, we will communicate this collaboratively, ensuring that traders have sufficient time to prepare. We are proposing that from the 30th of April, non-QNIGs and other goods arriving in Great Britain from the island of Ireland should arrive via a point of entry with a suitably designated BCP, or a small number of exempt points of entry where a BCP is planned. Further details will be confirmed as soon as possible. Next slide, please. So looking at composites versus compound products. So we've had quite a few questions about composite and compound products coming through. So we've put in here a clear definition of the difference between compound and composite and compound products. So compound products may contain processed and unprocessed POAO components. Any plant components provide special characteristics but are not integral to the final product. To be a composite product, any POA components must be processed, and any plant components must be integral to the final product. If your product is made up of more than one POA component and does not meet the definition of a composite product, it may be a compound product. Plant-based products that contain no POAO are not composite products. So there's more information available about this at the link here on gov.uk. Import composite products from the EU to Great Britain. And we also have a composite decision tree here on the link for business information leaflets. If you press that, you'll find out there are 2 composite decision trees there that will help you find out if your product is a composite product. Next slide, please. So compound products may contain processed and unprocessed POA components. Any plant components provide special characteristics, but they are not integral to the final product. So we've got 2 examples here. Firstly, example one is a consignment of product A. So product A contains 1 low-risk category POAO component and 1 medium-risk category POAO component. You'll need to make 1 import notification, choose medium as the highest risk category for commodities in this consignment. You'll need to upload accompanying documents for each component. So for the low risk POAO component, you'll need the commercial document for the product, which includes the low risk component and provides evidence that it meets the requirements for low risk category. For the medium risk POAO component, you'll need to upload accompanying documents such as the export health certificate, because it is a medium risk POAO component. Second example we have is product B. Product B contains 2 different medium risk category POAO components. So both components are different but medium risk category POAO. So you'll be able to make 1 import notification, choose medium as the highest risk category for the components, for the commodities in the consignment, and upload EHCs for both components because they're 2 different medium risk POAO components. So you'll need to upload EHCs and attach those to the import notification. Next slide, please. So Sarah's now going to take us through the getting it right at the border, looking at the CHED-P import notifications. This is Sarah John.
Thanks, Nikki. Great. So we've there's a couple of things that you really need to get right with the import notification to help make sure that your consignment isn't called into a BCP when it doesn't need to go. So the first thing that we wanted to highlight, and you've probably seen this if you're already making import notifications, is this new question, well, new from January, that says select the highest risk category for the commodities in this consignment. So it's really important that you do select the correct risk category, either medium risk or low risk, for the consignment you're making the import notification about. And the rule is, if the consignment contains all low risk commodities, select low risk. If the consignment contains all medium risk commodities, select medium risk. And if the consignment contains both low and medium risk commodities, select medium risk. The one exception is that iPass will automatically check if a commodity is high risk. If it identifies that the consignment contains high risk commodities, you will not see this screen. So yeah, it's just really important to get it right to make sure only the required import controls are applied to your consignment. Next slide, please. If it is medium risk, then this is just a reminder that you'll see a screen flash up to say health certificate required. Once you're past this screen, you click on the continue, you can actually save your import notification. If you don't already have a health certificate, ask for the health certificate from the exporter, and then come back and finish off your import notification. You must always remember to come back and finish it off and submit it, because the authorities won't be able to see it in iPath until you actually submit it. Next slide, please. Contact details. So this will show your contact details. Just double check it hasn't changed since the last time you made an import notification if you don't make them very often. This is really important because if your consignment has been called for an inspection, iPass will use this contact details to send you an email and a text message, and we will show you what that looks like later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Even more important is this nominated contacts field. So you've got the opportunity to add up to 5, and we'd recommend putting in 5 if you have 5 contacts of people that are involved or operators involved in bringing your consignment over into Great Britain. I've got some examples there, but there's probably other ones as well. It does say optional. We would strongly recommend you use this to provide those contacts. And the reason for that is these contacts will be notified if your import, if your consignment has been chosen for inspection. So as well as your own contact details, other people can also receive a message and an email about the consignment being called for inspection. So the haulier would be an obvious one for this, but also your customs agent, if you're working with a fast parcel operator as well, who's bringing it over. Really important to fill this in, even though it says optional. Thank you. Next slide, please. So from 30th of April, operators and drivers of loads travelling via GVMS, so Goods Vehicle Movement Service, enabled carriers will be able to use GVMS to check if they need to go for SPS inspection at a border control post or a control point for plants. You must tick yes to this question in the CHED import notification on iPass to activate this service. Ask your customs agent or freight forwarder or haulier if you're not sure if the routing uses GVMS. So just to be super clear, check if the carrier that your consignment's coming over is using GVMS. Your customs agent should be able to tell you that. If it's yes, click yes, and then you will be able to use, or the haulier will be able to use the GVMS service to find out if your consignment has been called for an inspection. So that's really important. If it's not coming via a GVMS enabled carrier, that's absolutely fine. We have an alternative way of getting that message to the people who need to know. So you'll just be kind of ticking no, and we'll show you how that works in the next section. Next slide, please. Okay, so this also is really important. So this is already in place for non-EU consignments coming in, but from 30th of April, HMRC and DEFRA systems will cross-check the CHED import notification and customs declaration for each consignment. So this will be starting for EU and continuing for non-EU consignments. So what do you need to do? you need to make sure that you submit the import notification using iPaths before your custom agent submits the customs declaration. And they use a different system, which is called the Customs Declaration Service, or CDS. Make sure that you use the new copy function to copy the CHED reference and the customs document code in the correct format for the customs declaration. So you can see an example here. So this will be available from the 30th of April, and it just means that it's you can actually copy the import reference number in the correct format for the customs declaration reference. Customs declaration service. This is such a common error, and it's really, really important that you get it right. It also gives you customs document code. Admittedly, the customs agent will probably know this, but it's just as well to copy both. And then you can put them in an email together with a PDF copy of the import notification, so you can actually download that once you've submitted it from iPaths. And just email all that over, and just ask them to make sure that any information they're putting in the customs declaration is consistent with the import notification, and in particular that the commodity codes are the same. And then once they have submitted the customs declaration, if there are any errors, so something's not quite matching between the import notification and the customs declaration, there will be an error message shown. And actually, if you slip onto the next slide, click onto the next slide, there's two things that will happen. So if the CHED, the import notification reference is not correct or not in the correct format for the customs declaration service, then your customs agent will see an error message from CDS. So this is just a little example. You can see in the red there that the reference number has just had some numbers transposed. So basically they'll get an error message that means they can fix it almost immediately after they have submitted the customs declaration. The commodity code might be incorrect as well. If that happens, they'll get the error message on CDS, but you'll also get an error message on the iPath dashboard. So this will be new from the 30th of April. So you'll get an error message come up. And again, you can work with your customs agent to fix it either on CDS or amend it on the import notification. So just a heads up about getting this right. If there is an error message because the two are not matching, then it will trigger for your consignment to come into the BCP, because CDS has found that there's something a bit strange about the import notification, or they haven't been able to find the import notification. So it's really, really important to get this right. And you must work with your customs agent. If your customs agent doesn't know this information, please pass it on. If you're working with a freight forwarder, pass it on as well, but they tend to do both the import notification and the customs declaration side by side. So maybe less of an issue. And I think that is the last slide for my section. Thank you. Yeah, I'll hand you over to Nikki.
Thanks, Sarah. Great. So as you know, at the moment we're going through an educative phase where we're really trying to help traders get it right at the border, and we've collated common errors together, which we're updating and able to show you in the webinars, so that you can learn how to rectify them and how to understand what the common errors are. So here we have the common errors stated, and then the guidance that we give you to rectify these errors. So firstly, we have EHC is signed, so the export health certificate is signed and dated, but it's been done after the dispatch date. So this is a common error. So the certificate must always be signed and issued before the date of dispatch. An exception may apply for a cancel and delete replacement certificate if one has been permitted. It must then be cross-linked and referenced to the original certificate and date of issuing, and the original must be signed in advance of dispatch. So please note that the time of dispatch is not required for POAO, products of animal origin. A second common error is that the co-signer details on the CHED-P do not match the export health certificate, the consigner details on the export health certificate. So we can't stress enough, you must match the information such as consigner details on the CHED-P and the export health certificate. This should always match. So the consigner details should always match on the CHED-P and the export health certificate. Another common error we're finding is in the descriptions of goods box. Again, we're finding sometimes that the CHED-P doesn't match the export health certificate description of the goods. So you must make sure that the net weights, the gross weights, the commodity codes, the package numbers, the package description, for example, how the commodity is packaged, is it in a pallet, box, crate, all this must match, must be the same in the CHED-P and the export health certificate. So the guidance is that the inspector at the border control point will need to be satisfied that the health certificate and the commercial documents relate to the same CHED notification. So the CHED-P notification must match the EHC in terms of the co-signer details and in terms of the description of goods. So take care to make sure that these descriptions in the EHC match the same descriptions in the CHED notification. Next slide, please. Another common error that we've been picking up is that low-risk consignments are arriving without accompanying commercial documents or being sent without accompanying commercial documents. So you don't need to provide a health certificate for low-risk consignments, but they must come, low-risk border target operating model risk category consignments must come with relevant commercial documents from the supplier. You don't need to provide a health certificate because they're low risk, but so they won't be subject to routine documentary identity and physical checks, but you must include relevant commercial documents because these support and provide evidence of the commodity risk level. So you need the supporting commercial documents, the relevant commercial documents for low risk consignments. You must accompany low risk assignments. They must have the relevant commercial documents. Another common error is in the co-signer and the export details. So, for example, the name and the address of the person dispatching the consignments from the exporting country is different on some of the documents. This is quite a common error, actually. So you must take care that the co-signer export details, the name, the address of the person dispatching the consignment from the exporting country is the same on the CHED-P as the EHC, the same matching names and addresses on the CHED-P as the EHC, as the export health certificate. Next slide, please. Another common error is that the attestation is incorrectly deleted on the export health certificate. So what we're finding is that you need to check that attestations are completed in accordance with the model certificate notes for completion, and non-applicable attestations must be correctly deleted or omitted from the certificate. Deletions carried out by hand have to be initialed and stamped. But if completed electronically as a verifiable PDF, additional stamps and signatures are not required because there's a verifiable PDF signature. Another common error is signature errors on the EHC. So if it's a paper certificate, it must bear the signature and stamp of the certifying officer. And verifiable PDF certificates must bear a valid digital signature. Another common error is that pages are numbered incorrectly. They're not sequentially numbered. So you must make sure, you must check that all pages of the certificate are sequentially numbered. 1, 2, 3, 4. All pages of the certificate must be sequentially numbered. Another common error is that there's no regionalisation code provided on the export health certificate. So our guidance is, if a product is subject to regionalisation measures, you must include the correct regionalisation code as selected from the list on gov.uk. And there's a link there to the list of regionalisation codes on gov.uk. So make sure that if a product is subject to regionalisation measures, you include the correct regionalisation code as listed on gov.uk. Next slide. Another common error that I think we talked about in the last webinar is that the EU address being provided for the operator responsible for the consignment is put instead of a UK address. So traders are providing an EU address for the operator responsible for the consignment, but the operator responsible for the consignment is the person responsible for completing and submitting the CHED in IPAFs. They may be the importer or a person acting on the importer's behalf. Importers and EU or EFTA-based producers and exporters who are responsible for the end-to-end import process, for example, the delivery duty paid, must establish a registered UK business premises or office, or appoint a representative who is based in the UK, such as a customs clearing agent, if they do not have a physical presence in the UK. So make sure that the operator responsible for the consignment, so importers and EU EFTA-based producers and exporters who are responsible for the end-to-end import process, must establish a registered UK business premise or office, or appoint a representative based in the UK, such as a clearing agent, customs clearing agents, if they don't have a physical presence in the UK. Also important, some traders have not been completing the establishment field in the CHED. The establishment of origin must be included in the import notification. So check that you do include the establishment of origin field in your import notification. And as we were touching on earlier, composites are being incorrectly categorized. We have these details on gov.uk. We have given you some links earlier in the webinar. So goods are being incorrectly identified as composite products and therefore classified as low risk when this is not the case. So ensure that your exporter has confirmed that the product is a composite. So you can follow the process set out in the composite decision tree, which is linked there, and look at the guidance on gov.uk that we went into earlier. Next slide, please. So from the 30th of April 2024, all imports of animal products that are subject to SPS controls must enter GB via a port of entry with a border control post designated for that type of commodity. That's a key piece of information. And when you go onto gov.uk, you can find out which border control posts are designated for the commodity you require. We have the abbreviations there. POA are products of animal origin, composite products, germinal products, animal byproducts, hay and straw, HC, products for human consumption, etc., etc. Frozen, those taking frozen and chilled products, chilled products. All this detail is on the gov.uk site. If you follow this link and look to the right-hand side, you'll find these columns there. Next slide, please. So this is just an example, but we do have a BCP map that is going to be updated as new BCPs are designated and approved. This example is of the Tilbury Port Health Authority site, but there are many others throughout UK and Scotland and Wales. So just make sure that you keep checking on the BCP map to find BCPs that are designated. Next slide, please. So the second poll, again, thank you very much for joining this for us. Don't think too hard about it. We're just getting a sense of where you are in terms of how your thought and preparation process is going for the April 30th SPS checks. So thinking about the changes your organisation might need to make for the introduction of border checks on the 30th of April, please indicate if you or your organisation are working on or have completed any of the following actions. And do tick all that apply. So you can tick more than one answer there. Tick all that apply and press submit. So we have assessing the impact of the introduction of border checks on your organisation, or are you at the stage of identifying the required changes to your operations? Are you developing a plan to deliver the required changes? Are you discussing these changes with your supply chain? And are you implementing new ways of working? Just press submit. That's great. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to pass you back to Sarah, who's going into some detail on the new SPS inspection messaging service.
Thanks, Nikki. So as we mentioned earlier, there are two kind of routes that messages will go out about a consignment being called for an SPS inspection. This is. So the first route I mentioned earlier was the GVMS route. So if you tick yes, and the GVMS the carrier is GVMS enabled, then we will be piggybacking on the HMRC Goods Vehicle Movement Service messaging that already exists for customs inspections. So basically, there will be a couple of different ways that hauliers specifically will be able to find out whether a consignment in their load is being called for an inspection. The first is to use the GVMS portal, which is check if a consignment has been called for inspection service. where they can put in the goods movement reference. It will tell them whether a consignment within that load has been called for an inspection and the name of the border control post. The second way would be there are actually customs information screens on ferries. So they can actually look at that ferry. It will have their vehicle registration number, and next to it an amber box with the name of the border control post in it as well. So it's a kind of a proactive approach. They are already using this for customs inspections. We are doing some communications, working with the haulier associations to make sure that they know that this will also be used for SPS inspections as well from the 30th of April. For non-GVMS carriers and ports and for transit, there will be a different way which will use iPaths actually. So I think we've got some slides to show you. So next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so basically, once an import notification will be submitted, you will see the next screen you'll see will show you whether will show you an initial risk assessment, which will say whether an inspection is required or no inspection is required. So you can see those two on your screens at the moment. They're only for illustration. The text might change slightly by the time you see it on your screens from the 30th of April. But we wanted to show you now what you'll be seeing on screen. And also just to say that this is an initial risk assessment. Obviously, once the inspectors have done a documentary check, if they're finding something that they would require your consignment to be called in for inspection, as usual, they can override this initial risk assessment. If that happens, you will get an email and a text message. You and those 5 nominated contacts will get that, so you'll still get the same messaging. So next slide, please. Yeah, so if the consignment is called in for inspection, what you'll get is a message flash up on the iPass dashboard, but you'll also get an email notification as well, which is on the left-hand side, which tell you exactly which import notification reference it refers to, and it will also tell you which border control post it needs to go to. And then on the right-hand side is an example of the SMS text messaging service, which will go to you and the 5 nominated contacts as well with the same information. So it doesn't replace checking your iPass dashboard consistently until the consignment has cleared border control post, but it's an additional way of getting that message. So you must monitor emails and your mobile phone. Thank you. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, if your consignment is traveling via a carrier using GVMS and the haulier has used that, then you will get this screen on the left-hand side, just reminding you that the driver must check with the GVMS before disembarking in the usual way that they do for customs inspections right now. And it will tell the driver if a consignment in their load has been called for inspection. Thank you. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of what they see on the screens. Thank you. I think that is the last slide. Yeah. So handing back to Nikki now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, so just quickly to remind you about the checks and inspections from 30th of April that can take place. Next slide, please. So we have a lot more detail on this on the March the 6th webinar, but just to remind you of the different types of checks that can be carried out on consignments at a BCP. So firstly, there's documentary checks. So this is, as it sounds, a check that requirements have been met. So, for example, if a health certificate is required, that is attached, and any documents provided about the consignment are consistent, match with the import notification. This check will often be conducted remotely, so ahead of the arrival to the BCP. An identity check is a check that commodities identification marks, stamps, and other necessary product or packaging information conform to the declaration on the health certificate and the supporting documentation. A physical check is where the inspector physically examines the product. So that may include sampling the product to look for pathogenic microorganisms or illegal contaminants. Then there are transit checks. Some consignments in transit through GB or using GB as a land bridge may require official seals to be checked on entry to GB. Next slide, please. Just to quickly go through the checks for germinal products from the EU. As we know, germinal products are high risk animal products, and so they're already subject to import controls. From the 30th of April 2024, germinal products also will be required to enter GB via an appropriately designated border control post. The relevant Port Health Authority will conduct 100% documentary, ID and physical inspections on germinal products at the BCP. Next slide, please. After checks have been completed, what happens? Well, the results will be recorded on the import notification. If the consignment is compliant with the SPS controls applied and it has customs clearance, then it's free to continue to the destination. If the consignment is found to be non-compliant, the Port Health Authority will contact you. We've talked about the driver messaging service earlier. The Port Health Authority will contact you with information about the actions that you may take, such as re-export, destruction, remedial action, or use of the consignment for another purpose in some permitted cases. Next slide, please. So we have much more detail on the charging for import controls in the March the 6th and earlier webinars. But with just a reminder that, as you know, Port Health Authorities charge for official controls undertaken on animal products, high-risk food not of animal origin, and certain certification checks on fish products, and organic products. So the fees are calculated on a low risk, medium risk and high risk category commodities. So the charge is proportionate to the level of risk and the control activity. And each Port Health Authority sets their own charges. So you'll need to go to the relevant Port Health Authority website to find out details of these charges. And I know that they have sent out some details to traders, some reminders, but you do need to set up a separate finance account or a Phyllis account for each Port Health Authority with a BCP you want to use in advance of the consignment arriving to avoid delays. So you can set up your separate Phyllis account with each Port Health Authority in advance for those BCPs that you want to use, just to avoid delays. Final question in the poll. Thank you very much for getting involved. It's really useful. Again, this is looking at confidence levels. How confident are you that your organisation will be ready for the import controls that will be introduced from the 30th of April? So how confident are you feeling that you'll be ready for the import controls introduced from the 30th of April? So don't think too hard about it. What's your top of mind feeling? Very confident, somewhat confident, neutral, somewhat unconfident, or very, very confident, or not sure. Choose one of these and press submit. Thank you. So just to remind you of the further resources and engagements we have. Next slide, please. As you know, we have the Business Readiness Forum. This is fortnightly, and it's an opportunity for GB, EU and EFTA stakeholders to receive updates on specific biosecurity, borders and trade-related cross-cutting and operational issues. You can listen in on teachings and you can raise questions. So for more information and joining details, please follow that email and we'll contact you and set you up. We also want to remind you that we have several more webinars in April to guide you through to the 30th of April milestone. So do come again to our live webinars. If you follow that link on Eventbrite, you can sign up again for the webinars that are coming up on the 9th and the 23rd of April. Next slide, please. To remind you also that we have at DEFRA produced special business leaflets and video guides that can help you with your questions on complying with the 30th of April SPS controls. We have an export health certificate leaflet, import notification leaflet. We already have a plants border control leaflet, and soon we'll have a POAO border control leaflet. We have the 2 composite decision tree diagrams that will help you find out if you're composite or not. We touched on this earlier. Great. So you have all those links in the in your email. Let's go straight to the Q&A now. So the first question, if I bring a medium meat product into the UK from the EU, would I need to send a driver to a designated for this commodity border control post, or can I continue using the same route and only offload those items selected for checks? Richard, I think you could answer this question.
Yes, sorry for the delay coming off there. Yes.
Thank you.
So the question, if I bring medium meat product into UK from EU, normally carried over, would I need to send the driver to a designated commodity border control post, or can I use the same route? So the answer is that all products must enter the UK GB, via a designated BCP, or should I say suitably designated BCP. So if you are currently entering by a point that doesn't have a BCP, you will not be able to do that in future. So that is really important. Once the controls are set up, if you are called in to the BCP for a physical identity check, you will need to attend. If you are using a paper-based EHC, after there will be a brief period of allowance, you will need to drop off that paper EHC at the BCP as well.
Great, thank you, Richard. Next slide, please. Will there be any further BCPs in Scotland?
Yes, I can answer that one. So currently there are quite a few BCPs designated within Scotland. If you want to go and have a look on gov.uk, there will be a list of all the BCPs. It is unclear from the question whether there is a particular designation attached to this one, but the list will provide you with all the designations in for the BCPs. The available BCPs are being updated as more designations are approved. So we would advise you to revisit that list frequently because it will be updated in the run-up to April.
Great, thank you, Richard. Next question. So this is a groupage question. How is it, if you'd like to answer this one, how likely would it be for a groupage truck to be checked entirely?
So it should be noted that if there are physical checks on a specific consignment on a groupage loads, this does not necessarily lead to physical checks on all the other consignments. In some cases, other consignments on the lorry may need to be unloaded to allow for the physical inspection of one consignment. It's important for all documentation for individual consignments to be accurately filled out. If an individual importer's EHC or pre-notification is incomplete or inaccurate, and their consignment is in a groupage lorry collected for additional checks at border control post, as I mentioned before, it could affect the entire vehicle. But to mitigate such scenarios, the importance of filling out these documents is strongly emphasised, and there's guidance on import pre-notification requirements on gov.uk.
Thank you, Harris. That's very useful. Next slide, please. Yes, so Harris, I wonder if you can help on this one as well. Please, can you clarify the position regarding the rejection of groupage loads?
Hi, yeah, I can speak on this one quickly. But so in the case of groupage, so either a single consignment of mixed products or a mixed load of multiple consignments, if part of the consignment fails and part of the consignment passes, the competent authority can decide to break down the consignment to allow part of the consignment to continue to its destination while the other part is sent back and destroyed or destroyed. However, this is dependent on inspector discretion, which can be influenced by whether the competent authority can guarantee it poses no biosecurity risk and does not disrupt other official controls. But to speak directly to the question, the other parts of the consignment can continue on to their destination, provided no biosecurity risk can be ensured by the inspector.
Great, thank you, Harris. Next slide, please. So we have products of animal origin for human consumption on a RoRo road vehicle. Does this need to go to a port with a BCP that accepts this product, or can it go to any port and then drive to an inland BCP that accepts this product? John, are you able to take that? Or Richard, great.
Hi, yeah, I can take that. So when the import pre-notification is made, the BCP will be identified within that pre-notification. So what will happen is that you will need to go to the BCP at the point of entry. So most BCPs will be located within the environments of the port. So you will not be able to leave the port and go to an alternative BCP. The only exceptions are where there are some inland ports, for example, Sevington, where you will need to exit the port and go to Sevington if you are requested to go in there. So the key thing is you can't choose which BCP you can go to once you have arrived. It has to be identified before you arrive, and in most cases you will need to clear the BCP before you leave the port.
Great, thank you, Richard. Next question, please. So research and development samples for research carried out in universities. John, could you answer this question?
Yes, I can do. I'll be quick because I'm conscious that we're over time. So there is guidance on the import process for samples set out in the border target operating model itself, pages 41 and 42 of that document. I'd refer people to that. Broadly speaking, animal product samples fall into different categories. So products of animal origin, samples of those, i.e. products for human consumption, they very simply just follow the border target operating model rules for the risk category applicable to that product. For animal byproducts, it's slightly more difficult or more complicated. Research and development samples can refer to a range of different goods for use in different scientific fields. Where they meet the definition outlined in regulation and won't be resold for commercial purposes, those goods are already exempted from checks at border control posts. That will continue to be the case under the border target operating model. However, if those research samples are to be resold, then they're not in line for that derogation and continue to follow the process for commercial imports. And then that will be determined by their risk categorization, so high, medium or low. There's also a slightly different process for trade samples of animal byproducts, which again is detailed in the TOM itself.
Great, thank you, John. Should all health certificates for medium risk products have a region code? This probably have to be our last question. So Richard, could you answer that?
Yes, they only need a region code where they are subject to particular regionalisation requirements. So not all medium risk goods will need a region code.
Great, thank you. Actually, what's the last question coming up? Richard, can you answer this quickly? Do you think for ABPs covering by container, does this, if the ETA changes, does the date in IPAS need to be updated?
Simply yes, and that will apply to any imports. So if the date of or time of arrival changes, you should notify the PHA or local authority.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panel of Q&A, and thank you for staying with us, and we hope that's been useful. We'll be back again in April. Do go to Eventbrite and sign up. Thank you.